Chapter 10. The End. It was a strange sight when the king and Ricardo looked down from the flying horse. Beneath them lay the city of Manoa, filling with its golden battlements and temples the hollow of a mountain. Here were the palaces all carved over with faces of men and beasts, with twisted patterns of serpents. The city walls were built of huge square stones, and among the groves towered pyramids, on which the people did their service to their gods. From every temple top came the roar of beaten drums, great drums of serpent skin. But in the center of the chief square of the town was gathered a wild crowd of men in shining copper armor and helmets of gold, and glittering dresses with feathers. Among them ran about priests with hideous masks, crying on to besiege and break down the royal palace. From the battlements of the palace, the king's guardsmen were firing arrows and throwing spears. The mob shot arrows back, some of them tipped with leaded straw, to burn the palace down. But from the very center of the square was a clear space of ground, on which fell the shadow of a tall column of red stone, all carved with serpents and the faces of gods. Beside it stood a horrible figure to see, a man clothed in serpent skins, whose face was the grinning face of a skull, but the skull was shining black and red in patches. A long white beard flowed from beneath it. This man, mounted on a kind of altar of red stone, waved his hand and yelled, and seemed to point to the shadow on the column which fell across the square. The people were so furious and so eager that they did not at first notice King Prigio as he slowly descended. But at last the eyes within the skull looked up and saw him, and then the man gave a great cry and rent its glittering dress of serpent skin, and held up his hands. Then a multitude looked up, and seeing the flying horse, let their weapons fall, and the man of the skull tore it from his face, and knelt before King Prigio, with his head in the dust. "Thou hast come now, Pachacamac, as foretold in the prophecy of the court of venerable knots. Thou hast come, and behold the shadow of the stone. Thou art too late, O Lord of earth and sea." Then he pointed to the shadow, which, naturally, was growing shorter, as the sun drew near the midday. He spoke in the language of the ancient Incas of Peru, which, of course, Prigio knew very well, and he was also of the Pachamac, was the god of the people. "I have come," said Prigio, with presence of mind, "as it was been prophesied of old." "Riding on a beast that flies," said the old priest, "even as the great oracle declared. Lord Pachacamac, even though we die today." "In what way can I help my people?" said Prigio. "Thou knowest. Why should we instruct thee? Thou knowest that on Midsummer Day every year, before the shadow shrinks back to the base of Huaca of Manoa, the sacred stone, we must offer a maiden to lull the earthquaker with a new song. Lo, now the shadow shrinks to the foot of Hanoka, and the maiden is not offered. For the thought fell on the daughter of thy servant Inca, and he refuses to give her up. One daughter of his, he says, has been sacrificed to the sacred birds, the Kunthers. The birds were found slain on a hilltop. No man knows, but then the maiden vanished." "Why, it must have been Jacqueline. I killed the birds," said Ricardo to Pentoothman. "Silence, not a word," said the king sternly. "And what makes you bear arms against the Inca?" he asked the old man. "We would slay him and her," answered the priest. "But when the shadow shrinks to the foot of the stone, the sun will shine straight down to the hollow hill of the earthquaker, and he will waken and destroy Manoa and the temples of the sun." "And wherefore would thou slay him when you must all perish?" "Oh, Pachacamac would have revenge before they die." "Oh, folly of men," said the king solemnly, and then he cried, "Lead me to the Inca. This day you shall not perish. It is not predicted in the court of venerable knots that I shall not slay this monster." "There is no Pachacamac. For the shadow shortens," said the priest. "Lead me to the Inca," answered Prigio. At this time the people rose with a great shout, for they too had been kneeling, and sending a flag of truce before King Prigio, the priests led him to the palace. The ground was strewn with bodies of the slain, and through them Prigio rode slowly into the courtyard, where the Inca was sitting in the dust, weeping and throwing ashes on his long hair and his golden raiment. The king bade the priest remain outside the palace gates, and dismounted, and advancing to Inca, he raised him and embraced him. "I come, a king to a king," he said. "My cousin, take courage, your sorrows are ended. If I do not slay the earthquaker, sacrifice me to your gods." "The prophecy is fulfilled," said the Inca, and he wept for joy. "Yet thou must hasten, for it draws near to noon." Then Prigio went up to the golden battlements, and saying no word, he waved his hand. In a moment the square was empty, for the people rushed to give thanks at the temples. "Wait my coming, my cousin," said Prigio to the Inca. "I shall bring you back the daughter that was lost, when I have slain your enemy." The Inca would have knelt at his feet, but the king raised him, and bade him prepare such a feast as had never been seen in Manoa. "The lost are found today," he said. "Be ready to welcome them." Then, mounting the flying horse, with Dick beside him, he rose towards a peak of the hill where the earthquaker had his home. Already the ground was beginning to tremble, and the earthquaker was stirring in his sleep, for the maiden of new song had not been sent to him. The year ended at noon, and then he would rise and rule at Manoa. The sun was approaching midday, and Prigio put spurs to the flying horse. 10 minutes more, and the sun would look straight down the crater of the hollow hill, and the earthquaker would rouse himself in the light the heat he felt on his body. Already the light of the sun shone slanting halfway down the hollow cone as a whirlpool of air caught the flying horse and drew him swiftly down and down into the shadowy halls. There knelt and wept the nurses of the earthquaker on the marble floor, but Jacqueline stood a little apart, very pale, but not weeping. Ricardo had leaped off before the horse touched the ground and rushed to Jacqueline and embraced her in his arms. And oh, how glad she was to see him, so that she was quite forgot her anger and laughed for joy. "Oh, you've come, you've come! I knew you would come!" she cried. Then King Prigio advanced, and the mighty weight of his hand, to the verge of the dreadful gulf of the earthquaker. The dim walls grew radiant, and a long slant of yellow light touched the black back of the earthquaker, and a thrill went through him and shook the world, so that, far away, the bells rang in Pantufia. A moment more and he would awaken in his strength, and once awake he would shatter the city walls and ruin Manoa. Even now the great mass of rock fell from the roof deep down in the secret caves and broke into flying fragments, and all the echoes roared and sang. King Prigio stood with a mighty mass poised in his hands. "Die!" he cried, and uttered the words of the power and the magic spell of the dark moon lady had taught him. Then all its invisible natural weight came into the mass which the king held, and down shot the body of the earthquaker. And where it had been was nothing but a vast abyss, empty, silent, and blank, and bottomless. Far, far below, thousands of miles below, in the very center of the earth, lay the dead earthquaker, crushed flat as a sheet of paper, and the sun of midsummer day shone straight down on that dreadful chasm, and could not waken him any more forever. The king drew a long breath. "Stupidity has saved the world," he said. With only strength to draw back one step from the abyss, he fell down, hiding his face in his hands. But Jacqueline's arms were around his neck, and the maidens brought him water from the ice-cold spring, and soon King Prigio was himself again, and ready for anything. But afterwards he used to say that the moment when the earthquaker stirred was the most dreadful in his life. Now in Manoa, where all the firm foundations of the city had trembled once, when the sun just touched the earthquaker, the people seemed the shadow of the sacred column had crept to its foot, and yet Manoa stood firm again, and the temple of the sun was not overthrown. Raised such a cry that it echoed even through the halls within the hollow hill. Who shall describe the joy of the maidens, and how often Jacqueline and Ricardo kissed each other? "You have saved me!" she cried to the king, throwing her arms round him again. "You have saved Manoa!" "And you have saved the Prince of Pantufia, not once or twice," said Majesty. And he told Dick how much he had owed to Jacqueline in the fight with the yellow dwarf and the fight with the giant, and he did not think it necessary to mention the affair at Rome. Then Dick kissed Jacqueline again, and all the maidens kissed each other, and they were quite cried for gladness. "But we keep his majesty the Inca waiting," said Prigio. "Punctuality is the courtesy of kings. You ladies will excuse me. I am sure if I remove first to the dungeon her whom we call Princess Jacqueline, the Inca, her father, has a claim on us to preference." Then, placing Jacqueline on the saddle and leaving Dick to comfort the other young ladies, who were still rather nervous, the king flew off to Manoa, for the wind, of course, died with the death of the earthquaker. I cannot tell you the delight of all Manoa and of the Inca when they saw the flying horse returning, and recognized their long-lost princess, who rushed into the arms of her father. They beat the serpent drums, for they had no bells, on the tops of the temples. They went quite mad with delight. Enemies kissed in the streets, and all the parents, without exception, allowed the young people who happened to be in love to be married the very day. Then Prigio brought back all the maidens, one after the other, and Dick last, as he fell at the Inca's feet and requested leave to marry Jacqueline. But before that could be done, King Prigio mounted on the palace balcony and made a long and very lucid speech to the assembled people. He began by explaining that he was not their god, Pachacamac, but king of a powerful country of which they had never heard before, as they lived very much withdrawn in an unknown region of the world. Then he pointed out, in the most considerate manner, that the religion was not all he would wish, otherwise they could never sacrifice young ladies to wild birds and earthquakers. Next he sketched out the merits of his own creed, that of the Lutheran Church, and the Inca straightway observed that he was proposed to establish it at Manoa at once. Some objection was raised by the old priest in the skull mask, but when the Inca promised to make him an archbishop and to continue all his revenues, the priest admitted that he was perfectly satisfied, and the general public cheered and waved their hats with emotion. It was arranged that the Inca, with his other daughters, should visit Pantufli immediately, both because he could not bear to leave Jacqueline, and also because there were a few points on which he felt that he still needed information. The government was left in the hands of the archbishop, who began at once burning all his skull mask. You may see one like it in the British Museum and the Mexican Room. And by letting loose all the birds and beasts which the Manoans had used for worship. So all the young people were married in the Golden Temple of the Sun, and all the earthquakers' nurses, who were under 30, were wed to the young men who had been fond of them before they were sent to the Hollow Hill. These young men had never cared for anyone else. Everybody wore bridal favors, and all unengaged ladies acted as bridesmaids, and such a throwing of rice and old shoes has seldom been witnessed. As for the happy royal pair, with their fathers and the other princess, who did not happen to be engaged, back they flew to Pantuflia. And there was Queen Rosalind, waiting at the palace gates, crying and laughing with pleasure when she heard that the wish of her heart was fulfilled, and Jacqueline was to be her daughter. And as for the earthquaker, said her majesty, I never was really anxious in the least, for I knew no beast in the world was a match for you, dear. So, just to make everything orderly and correct, Ricardo and Jacqueline married, over again, in the Cathedral of Pantuflia. The marriage presents came in afterwards, of course. Among them, what do you think? Why, the 7-league boots, and the sword of sharpness, with a very polite note of extraordinary size. The giant who does not know when he has had enough presents his hearty congratulations to the royal pair, and begs to lay at their feet the 7-league boots, as they don't fit me, and the sword which Prince Ricardo left in the giant's keeping recently. The giant hopes no bad blood, and I am, yours faithfully, the giant, etc. P.S. The little woman sends her congratulations. You see, the giant was not such a bad sort of fellow after all, and Prince Ricardo always admitted that he never met a foe more gallant and good-humored. With such a clever wife, Ricardo easily passed all his examinations, and his little son, Prince Prigio, named an august grandfather, never had to cry, Mama, Mama, father's plucked again. So they lived happily in a happy country, occasionally visiting Manoa, and as they progressed the magical water of life from the Fountain of Lands, I do not believe that any of them ever died at all, but that Prigio is still the king of Pantufia. No need for such kings to ever die.